Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at our top stories. Russia has accused Kyiv of using civilians as human shields as it reacts to strikes in Sumy, which killed at least 34 people. Russia's defense ministry says that 2 Iskander missiles were fired at only military targets following broad condemnation. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has urged Donald Trump to visit his nation ahead of any ceasefire deal. Zelensky made the comments in a CBS interview that was filmed before the Sumy strikes. US Director of National Economic Council Kevin Hassett says the US is 100% not expecting a recession following Donald Trump's unprecedented tariff action. Hassett also revealed that enormous progress has been made in talks with the EU. Well, Chinese President Xi Jinping has called for stronger ties with Vietnam as the two nations signed dozens of cooperation agreements. Xi is in Hanoi amid heightening trade tensions with the US following Trump's tariffs. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has said he will announce tariffs on semiconductors over the next week. Trump also revealed that the tariff exclusions on smartphones and computers will likely be short-lived. Further Israeli military action has been reported following a strike on a Gaza hospital where a child died, according to the World Health Organization. Fighting in the enclave comes amid negotiations on a hostage release deal. Eight Pakistani nationals have been killed in southeastern Iran, according to a Pakistan government statement. The Pakistani embassy is working with Iranian authorities to investigate the killing and repatriate the bodies. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi will visit Russia this week prior to a second round of talks with the United States over a nuclear deal. A meeting scheduled to take place in Rome on Saturday follows a meet in Oman over the weekend. A Russian drone attack on Odessa injured 8 people and damaged homes, a medical facility and a warehouse, according to regional officials. Moreover, separate Russian strikes on the northeastern region of Kharkiv killed 4 elderly residents. Meanwhile, Russia has said that its missiles hit a meeting of Ukrainian army commanders in Sumy, accusing Ukraine of using civilians as a human shield, after Kyiv said the attack on Sunday killed at least 34 people in one of the deadliest strikes of the entire war. Russia's defense ministry said its army launched 2 ballistic Iskander-M missiles at the place of a meeting of command staff, claiming that it had killed 60 Ukrainian soldiers. The Kremlin rejected that its army had targeted civilians or that there had been any kind of mistake. Russia's attack drew condemnation and accusations of war crimes from leaders around the world. US President Donald Trump, who is pushing for a ceasefire, called it a horrible thing and suggested Russia has made a mistake. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer also said that he was appalled, and his Italian counterpart Giorgia Meloni called it cowardly. Germany's Chancellor-in-Waiting, Friedrich Merz, on Sunday described the attack as a serious war crime, deliberate and intended. On the other hand, the Kremlin criticised Germany's Chancellor-in-Waiting, Friedrich Merz, on Monday over comments suggesting Germany might send Taurus long-range missiles to Ukraine. The strike on Sumy came less than 48 hours after Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff held talks with Putin in St. Petersburg. The Kremlin on Monday called the meeting extremely helpful and very effective, without elaborating on the discussions. Well, joining us to discuss these developments is Keith Vaz, former British minister, who's joining us from Goa. Keith, thank you very much for taking some time out to speak with us today. There are detailed Russian claims on this strike, which, if we believe Ukrainian officials, has killed 34 people, injuring dozens more. With this contradictory statement, where do you think the reality lies in this situation?
think people are genuinely shocked that this has happened. There was a brief statement made by President Trump, who said even he was shocked by the attack that was made on Sumy. However, he stopped short of saying, he said it was a mistake, but he didn't say who had told him it was a mistake. And certainly the Russians are not saying it was a mistake. But this is the largest number of civilians that have been killed in Ukraine in this way since 2023. So what's happened in Sumy is a very serious state of affairs, and it flies in the face of the attempts that are being made by the Trump administration through Steve Witkoff and Keith Kellogg to try and bring the sides together. What's also very clear is that those diplomatic initiatives that are going on are not bearing fruit. Russia is refusing, in a very real sense, to sit at a table with Ukraine to try and resolve this matter. So it must be frustrating the Trump administration. If people can remember back, I know it seems like a year, but it was actually only a few weeks, when President Zelensky went to the White House. The tables have turned since then. When he was being blamed, now it seems for the first time that the American administration is accepting that the Russians are deliberately dragging their heels. While they are dragging their heels, they now control 18.9% Ukraine. And it has galvanized European leaders, such as the Chancellor-elect Merz and the 40 nations that met together in Brussels, to provide Ukraine with even more resources to try and deal with this problem. I think a total of 24 billion has been pledged at the conference that was held this week in Brussels.
Yes, Keith, I want to bring up a point you made about that meeting between Witkoff and Putin. What message does this send from Russia that if this attack is true and so many civilians have been killed, one of the worst attacks on civilians since the war started, what message is Russia sending so soon after a meeting with a top US diplomat?
The message is that they don't really care what's being done. Their aim is to take as much territory as possible before the ceasefire takes effect. Their aim is to make sure that they proceed. There is now evidence that there are Chinese soldiers who are working with the Ukrainians. They've been captured by by the Russians. They're working with the Russians, not the Ukrainians. They've been captured by the Ukrainians. And I think China now has serious questions to ask, to answer about what exactly is happening. So from that point of view, I think it's really important that we see these dramatic developments over the last week, which are clearly causing a lot of concern to President Zelensky, who has done a 360 turn and said he's prepared to have negotiations, but he is not prepared in those circumstances to be able to have decisions taken from him. So these are all very serious consequences. As I've said before to you, Josh, Sergei Lavrov has been foreign minister for years and years, 2 decades. President Putin has been in power for over 2 decades. They are very wily operators, and they are not just going to come to the conference table unless they get as much territory as possible, and sadly, unless they kill as many people as possible, which seems to be going on now. They seem to be oblivious to the bloodshed that's occurring. As we speak, this is continuing. And that is why it is absolutely vital that the ceasefire talks started in Saudi Arabia are continued. Everyone is brought to the table together. If President Trump wants to do something really positive, he should be bringing people to the table and making sure that all 3 parties are able to sit at the table and come to a ceasefire agreement. Otherwise, this will go on. Just finally, Josh, on the questions that have been raised by Keith Kellogg, the special envoy, he, of course, this week suggested that it's quite possible to divide Ukraine as we divided Berlin. He walked back from that statement, but that's a very, very serious statement from a senior American official, that you could actually divide a country, 20% of whose territory has been conquered by another country. So these are serious questions now, and there really does need to be some answers to them.
Yes, Keith Vaz, unfortunately we are out of time in this instance, but thank you very much for your insight there. We will continue, of course, to bring you all of the updates from the Russia-Ukraine war, while also looking at those reactions that we had on screen from the world leaders. We now move on, and a deadly Israeli airstrike on Al Ali Hospital in Gaza City has triggered international outrage. The hospital was the last major facility threatening patients in northern Gaza. Israel says it targeted a Hamas command post but provided no evidence. Hamas denies any military presence at the site. The strike happened before dawn. At least one child died due to disrupted care. 40 critical patients couldn't be moved. The World Health Organization condemned the attack. Its chief said attacks on healthcare must stop. Qatar called the strike a horrific massacre. Ireland, Jordan, Egypt and Saudi Arabia also condemned the attack. The UK's foreign minister said repeated attacks on hospitals have degraded Gaza's healthcare. Germany also voiced concern, questioning how hospitals can evacuate so quickly. Calls for a ceasefire and urgent protection of civilians are growing louder. Well, as we look at these developments and the continued action within the Gaza Strip, we're joined by Anat Bernstein-Riker, President of the Israel-Asia Chamber of Commerce, joining us from Tel Aviv. Anat, thank you very much for being here with us. Of course, that reaction that we read out there from nations talking about this reported strike on a hospital within Gaza. Of course, the situation with hostages and the lack of movement for months now is the reason that fighting has returned to Gaza. But how can these instances where a potential hospital with patients has been struck can be avoided in the future?
I think that you have missed one point when mentioning that this hospital was targeted, and the fact that this hospital was a base for launching missiles towards Israel the evening before. And Hamas, time and again, using hospitals as a base for terror and sending missiles from those bases, thinking that Israel will not attack hospitals and other facilities which are schools, etc., or civilian. This is the method that Hamas is using from day one and for years. And when you condemn attack of hospitals, you should condemn first Hamas using those hospitals to attack. Israel is now on a holiday called Passover, and in the evening of Passover, villages in south of India were attacked, south of Israel, were attacked by missiles coming from Gaza. So this attack is in response, and you also need to mention that ahead of this attack, the hospital got alert that he needs to evacuate from this hospital. It's not a big hospital, let's be clear, and only a few sections were hurt, and most of the hospital was evacuated. They got enough time to evacuate, and this is the method of the Israeli Defense Forces announcing in ahead of time to evacuate before we attack. But it's definitely Hamas to blame for this incident.
Yes, Anat, I obviously understand what you're saying in regards to Hamas using these civilian hubs as bases. And of course, Israel's goal, they've made it clear their three goals. They want to make sure that Hamas release all dead and alive hostages, don't be in a position to strike Israel once again, and also can't regroup and run the Palestinians in Gaza. While that is the case, there's clear condemnation here from world leaders with countries that have also supported Israel. So in this instance and moving forward, do you think there can be a change of tact, or is this just a case of until a ceasefire is agreed, then this sort of strike will continue, acknowledging, of course, that Hamas in this situation, if that is to be true, are putting the lives of their civilians at risk?
I mean, again, this is Hamas to blame. As to your first questions, negotiation is happening all the time. Even today in Cairo, the mediators, whether it's Qatar or Egypt, are in discussion with Israel, with Hamas, trying to reach an agreement. They haven't reached yet, but negotiations is ongoing. Personally, I would prefer that the discussion will be on all the hostages together and not in batches. It takes too long. We have 59 hostages still in Gaza. Out of them, 24 are alive, and any passing day, their condition is worsening, and we are afraid that time is running out, and we must free the hostages as soon as possible, end this war, take the leaders of Hamas out of Gaza, and progress to normality into this region. We are already 18 months into this war. And when the entire world is condemning, I understand we all are sorry for civilians, but please look who is the problematic here, a terror organization that kidnapped not just the Israelis, but also all the Palestinians. And it's about time that the world will understand who is to blame in this situation.
Yes, Anat, to bring an end to this discussion, I do want to bring up a difficult topic. You are, of course, in Tel Aviv, and we can't forget the Israeli people and the families and friends of the hostages that are still being held dead and alive. Can you provide us with some context of the feeling when the reminder is constantly being brought up in the news? The hostage deals are long and protracted and not making as much progress as potentially is wanted by all parties. What is the current feeling right now in Israel, and how are people getting on with their normal lives given the devastation caused to those families and friends?
So, as I said, it's Passover. Passover is the Jewish holiday of liberation. And our prayer every holiday, every Passover holiday is, let us be free. The Jewish people became free from Egypt during the Exodus. Same applies to hostages. Each family placed a chair, empty chair in its seder, which is the family dinner during Passover, for the hostages to come back. By now, in Israel, we know all the hostages by name, by faces, what's their story. We know them as if it's our family. And we feel that our family member is hostage, and we care about them as if they are our family. There is a gathering place, we call it the hostage square, but where people come all the time to help, to support the families. And we truly hope that this ordeal that we never had since our establishment in 48 will end, and we can go back to being the startup nation, the innovation hub, the normal country that we aspire to be.
Anat, thank you ever so much for joining us and providing us an insight there on the situation from an Israeli side and point of view. Of course, the death, destruction and despair being felt by both sides continues as negotiations also carry on. We will be across all of those developments from the Middle East as we get them. We move on now, and Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif called on Iran to apprehend those responsible for the killing of 8 Pakistani nationals in Meristan near the Pakistan-Iran border. The victims were from Pakistan's Punjab province and were shot after being bound by attackers. PM Shehbaz condemned the attack as a heinous act of terrorism and urged Iran to uncover the motives behind the assault. He also emphasised the growing threat of terrorism in the region and called for joint efforts to tackle extremism, particularly regarding terrorist groups operating from Afghanistan that have targeted Pakistan. The Pakistani government is collaborating with Iran to confirm the identities of the victims and facilitate their repatriation. Iran condemned the killings as inhumane and cowardly and pledged full cooperation in the investigation. Both countries acknowledged the importance of regional collaboration to combat terrorism and extremism. Well, joining us to discuss this situation is Berzin Wagmar, who is a Centre for Iranian Studies, School of Oriental and African Studies, joining us from London. Thank you very much for being here, Berzin. This situation, of course, a troubling one. Are you able to provide us a bit more insight on the current situation with extremism and terrorism, as this attack and killing has been labelled in the Pakistani-Irani region?
Depressingly enough, more of the same. You see, what happened today also, or rather on Saturday, when the said Pakistanis, all working class auto mechanics, car repairmen were killed, mirrors exactly what happened on 27th January 2024 too, when they were killed in Iran and Balochistan. They were also auto workers then too, poor expatriates who go from Pakistan to Iran to work. And then too, the pattern is similar in that they were targeted by what is the Baloch Liberation Army. But when I start my comments by saying depressingly the same at both ends, it is this what I wish to drive home, that Iran and Pakistan trade charges of terrorism, cross-border terrorism, but both are implicitly implicated in it, in that both mention renegade separatists, Baloch separatists, who find sanctuary in their respective Balochistans. Balochistan is the geographical area in question, and it is a namesake province in both countries, straddling the Iranian-Pakistan border. And this said border, about approximately 909 kilometers, is porous and poorly manned, though Pakistan has made efforts in recent years to fence it. Be that as it may, almost, for instance, and this is just one salient fact, 35% of diesel consumed in Pakistan's Balochistan province is smuggled from Iran. So there is a flourishing barter trade, which is illicit, that is going on, despite the fact that barter trade was legalized between both regimes in 2023. And not to mention that there is conspicuous amounts of crystal meth that is also with other Afghan opiates, and that complicates the picture, as you can tell, which are passed between both borders of Iran and Pakistan. So you have an amalgam of terrorism and narcotics, with both regimes officially looking the other way when it suits them. And they keep trading charges, which is what I must iterate, that Pakistan maintains that the Baloch Liberation Army has sanctuary in what is Iran's Sistan or Balochistan province, the very province in question where the Pakistanis were killed this Saturday past. And Iran concomitantly blames what is known as the Jaish-ul-Adl group, who are housed or putatively given sanctuary by the Pakistani deep state in Balochistan province of Pakistan. So it's a question of the pot calling the kettle black.
Yes, Berzin, I want to look at the current global instability that we are seeing. Of course, conflicts going on across the world, closer as well to Iran. Iran involved potentially in conflicts as well. Looking at this extremism and the potential risk of it growing, do you think this is typical with the current geopolitical instability we're seeing, and what can be done to curb this sort of attack?
Both regimes come clean, Tehran and Islamabad, if they wish to dial down the separatists who are afforded refuge and even tacit support by the intelligence services and deep states in either country, in order not to meddle in the affairs of each other. But as you asked pointedly about the situation which is tense in the region and is near abroad, well, in last January, 17 January 2024, as you know, Iran and its Revolutionary Guards launched 6 drone attacks and precision guided missiles into Pakistan's Balochistan that I just explained for your viewers, 50 kilometers from the Iran-Pak border into what is into Pakistan's Balochistan province, and there it targeted and killed the wives and children of the Jaish-ul-Adl group that I just mentioned to you. That is to say, the Baluchis who are creating havoc for the Iranian regime in Iran's Sistan and Balochistan province by targeting Shia mosques and also killing IRGC Revolutionary Guard personnel, which is what they have been particularly known for since 2003. So that is when Iran did launch the said missiles into Pakistan. And this against the backdrop of the Hamas massacres and wars taking place. And Iran did that some hours after it had launched the said missiles into Syria's Idlib province and also Iraq's autonomous Kurdish region to target IS fighters. So you can say that Iran does feel encroached by others, and it's defending itself, which is what the Iran regime did after launching the said missiles. And please remember, when Iran launched the missiles on Pakistan in January 2024, it was when the Iranian foreign minister and the Pakistani acting prime minister were actually meeting in Davos. And what's more, it was simultaneously at the same time as the Iran and Pakistan navies were conducting joint friendly exercises in the northern Arabian Sea. So, be that as it may, it did not deter Iran from undertaking that, which it did. And then, of course, 48 hours later, Pakistan reciprocated by launching missiles, the Pakistan Air Force and Army, into Iran's Sistan and Balochistan province. And then Foreign Minister Abdollahian flew into Pakistan to allay the situation and diffuse it as such. Pakistan recalled its ambassador from Tehran, but Iran physically refused him to let him leave for Islamabad too. So things were tense for a few days and weeks, and then they were, patched up, as it were. But patching up is no good because it's not cured, since nobody wants to tackle the question of Baloch separatists. And why are they deemed renegades? Because of poverty in the region. And that's not just another usual reaching out for the familiarity factor of poverty and terrorism. It's that the Baloch, as a persecuted ethno-linguistic minority, received both barrels from the regime in Tehran, which is bigoted and Shia, but also the regime in Islamabad, which is Sunni, like the Balochis, but Punjabi run and has treated them
Berzine,
shabbily.
I am extremely sorry to cut you off. We have unfortunately run out of time. Thank you very much for joining us. With that, that is an end, but we will continue to bring you more of the latest breaking news from across the world.